Oh, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai.
Jai.
Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai.
Jai.
Vrindavindam Ki Jai.
Jai.
Mayapurdam Ki Jai. Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulasi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga.
Hari Hari Bo.
Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Sri Mani Bhaktivedanta Swami Namini. Saraswati Devi Gaurani Pracharini Navashesha Shanavati Pastita Deshatarni. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, The Creation, Chapter 12, Birth of Emperor Parikshit. Today we're doing text 32 and 33. Yakshamano Shramedena Gyati Droha Jihashaya Rajalabdha Danodadyo Nanyatra Karadandayo Yakshamano Shramedena Gyati Droha Jihashaya Rajalabdha Danodadyo Nanyatra Karadandayo Yakshamano Shramedena Gyati Droha Jihashaya Rajalabdha Danodadyo Nanyatra Karadandayo. Everyone chant, please.
Hare Krishna. Please go ahead. Yakshamano Swamedhena Jati Droha Jihasaya Raja Labdha Dhanu Dadhyo Nanyatra Karadandayo. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Yakshyamano shameghena gyati droha jihasaya Raja labdha dhano dadhayo nanayatra kardandayo. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Yakshyamano swamedena gyati droha jihasaya Rajalabdha dhano dadhyo nanyatra karadandayoho.
Hare Krishna, thank you. Word for word translation. Yakshyamana, desiring to perform. Ashramedena, by the horse sacrifice ceremony. Gyatidroha, fighting with kinsmen. Jihasaya, for getting free. Raja, King Yudhishthir. Labdadana, for getting some wealth. Dadyo, thought about it. Na anyatra, not otherwise. Karadandayo, taxes and fines. Translation. Just at this time, King Yudhishthir was considering performing a horse sacrifice to get freed from sins incurred from fighting with kinsmen. But he became anxious to get some wealth, for there were no surplus funds outside of fines and tax collection. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. As the Brahmanas and Vipras had a right to be subsidized by the state executive head had the right to collect taxes and fines from the citizens. After the battle of Kurukshetra, the state treasury was exhausted, and therefore there were no surplus fund except for the fund from tax collection and fines. Such funds were sufficient only for the state budget, and having no excess fund, the king was anxious to get more wealth in some other way in order to perform the horse sacrifice. Maharaj Yudhishthir wanted to perform this sacrifice under the instruction of Bhishmadev. Text 33. Tad abhipretam alakshya brataro chutachodita danam brahinam ajarur udichyam dishiburisha. Translation. Understanding the hearty wishes of the king, his brothers, as advised by the infallible Lord Krishna, collected sufficient riches from the north left by King Maruta. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj Maruta, one of the great emperors of the world. He reigned over the world long before the reign of Maharaj Yudhishthir. He was the son of Maharaj Avikshit and was a great devotee of the sun god known as Yamaraj. His brother Samvarta was a rival priest of the great Brihaspati, the learned priest of the demigods. He conducted one sacrifice called Shankara Yagya, by which the Lord was so satisfied that he was pleased to hand over to him the charge of a mountain peak of gold. This peak of gold is somewhere in the Himalaya mountains, and modern adventurers may try to find it there. He was so powerful an emperor that at the day's end of sacrifice, the demigods from the other planets like Indra, Chandra, and Brihaspati used to visit his palace. And because he had the gold peak at his disposal, he had sufficient gold in his possession. The canopy of the sacrificial altar was completely made of gold. In his daily performance of the sacrificial ceremonies, some of the inhabitants of the Vayuloka, the airy planets, were invited to expedite the cooking work of the ceremony, and the assembly of the demigods in the ceremony was led by Vishwadev. By his constant pious work, he was able to drive out all kinds of diseases from the jurisdiction of his kingdom. All the inhabitants of higher planets like Devaloka and Pitriloka were pleased with him for his great sacrificial ceremonies. Every day, he used to give in charity to the learned brahmanas such things as beddings, seats, conveyances, and sufficient quantities of gold. Because of munificent charities and performances of innumerable sacrifices, the king of heaven, Indradev, was fully satisfied with him and always wished for his welfare. Due to his pious activities, he remained a young man throughout his life and reigned over the world for 1,000 years, surrounded by his satisfied subjects, ministers, legitimate wife, sons, and brothers. Even Lord Sri Krishna praised his spirit of pious activities. He handed over his only daughter to Maharaj Angira, and by his good blessings, he was elevated to the kingdom of heaven. First of all, he wanted to offer the priesthood of his sacrifices to learned Brihaspati, but the demigod refused to accept the post because of the king's being a human being, a man of this earth. He was very sorry for this, but on the advice of Narada Muni, he appointed Samvarta to the post, and he was successful in his mission. The success of a particular type of sacrifice completely depends on the priest in charge. In this age, all kinds of sacrifice are forbidden because there is no learned priest among the so-called brahmanas who go by the false notion of becoming sons of brahmanas without Brahminical qualifications. In this age of Kali, therefore, only one kind of sacrifice is recommended, Sankirtan Yagya, or as inaugurated by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Yakshamano Shwamedena Gyati Droha Jyashaya Rajalabda Dano Dadyo Nanya Chakara Dandayo Tadabi Pretama Lakshya Bhattaro Chuta Chodita Danam Prahina Majarur Udichamdi Shiburisha. Just at this time, King Yudhishthir was considering performing a horse sacrifice to get freed from sins incurred from fighting with kinsmen. But he became anxious to get some wealth, for there were no surplus funds outside of fines and tax collections. Understanding the hearty wishes of the king, his brothers, as advised by the infallible Lord Krishna, collected sufficient riches from the north left by King Maruta. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvashesha Shunivadi Pastuda Deshatarine. Hare Krishna. So as we're nearing the end of chapter 12, this is a common thing we've heard before about Parikshit Maharaj, and this is why I love Parikshit Maharaj so much. He's so sensitive and so Brahminical. Actually, you can't even call Maharaj Yudhishthir a Rajarshi. He's more of a Rishi Raja than a Rajarshi in one sense. He's not so much a king who is saintly or like a saint, but he's more like a saint who somehow or other has to be king. And he's so sensitive about this still after this time. Remember, he already was in so much anxiety, and all the great sages and his family, his family guru and all the sages preached to him that, the Kurukshetra war is actually justified. It's not your fault. You did what had to be done. Even Lord Krishna preached to him and he wasn't satisfied. So then he was directed to hear from Bhishma Dev. And he heard from that and he was satisfied. But even now, still, he's still feeling it in his heart that, all these kinsmen had to be killed. I should do something to make up for that. So it was decided he was going to do this Ashwamedha Yajna. And again, this is why I love Yudhishthira so much, because he's such a sensitive soul. He does his kingly duties, and he's a qualified Kshatriya, and there are many descriptions in the Mahabharata. He was quite capable and willing and able to, he would fight like anything in the Mahabharata. And if I'm remembering correctly, just like Arjuna, his favorite weapon and his best weapon was the bow and arrow. If I remember correctly, Yudhishthira Maharaj's particular weapon of choice was the spear. He was expert fighter with a spear. So he could do that, and he was willing to do that, and he did that. But his real pleasure was in devotional service and Brahminical life. His actual happiest time were the years that the Pandavas spent in exile. He was so happy and completely satisfied. He could have done that his whole life, living in the forest, visiting the ashrams of the sages and worshiping the different rishis there and hearing Krishna Katha from them and just going on like that. He was completely satisfied and happy doing that. He had no particular personal desire for kingship, for opulence, for any of those things. He did it, and he did it wonderfully, but simply because it was his duty, and even a somewhat reluctant duty sometimes. So now, in line with that, he's thinking, yes, this awful Kurukshetra war had to happen, and he's still feeling in his heart, and still considering that there's some sinful reaction for such a horrible thing, killing off practically most of the whole Kshatriya race, and so many kinsmen and relatives and gurus were killed. So he wants to perform this sacrifice, do the Ashwamedha sacrifice to do this. But after the war, there was not such a big surplus of gold and wealth for performing the Ashwamedha, because doing these traditional Vedic yajnas takes so much wealth. so much gold and so much grains and so much ghee and so much amazingly accomplished and expert brahmanas that we haven't seen the likes of in thousands and thousands of years. And there are none, literally none, zero existing today. So much is required to do that. He didn't have the wealth on hand, so he was wondering what to do. The options were kara dandayo. Kara in today's verse, kara means taxes. Dandayo means fines. Dandayo also means by force. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says like this, that kara means taxes, dandayo means force, that he could have taken the money by force. But of course, he's a great king. He wouldn't do that, and he didn't do that. And this is a personal point I like. I'll give a disclaimer here that politically speaking, I'm a libertarian, so I already don't like taxation. So I find it very heartening here that Maharaj Yudhishthira, he wasn't willing to put the population in such distress by violently or overly taxing the public. And this is a point, actually, it's interesting. I find it interesting. Prabhupada brings this up many times in his purports when he's discussing Prithu Maharaj, when he's discussing Jad Bharat's instructions to Rahugana Maharaj, when he's discussing Maharaj Priyavrata, he keeps on bringing this up, that unnecessarily taxing the citizens is a great crime for the Kshatriyas to do that, to unnecessarily do it for base reasons or to misuse the money or to use the money for sense gratification. So this is an important point. And he also mentions many times that reference in the 12th canto, where describing predictions for the age of Kali, that in Kali Yuga, so-called political leaders, government leaders, will just be thieves and rogues in the guise of political leaders. Great example of that is the personality of Kali. He appeared dressed as a king, but he was actually the greatest rogue. So 12th canto predicts that all political leaders will be like that they'll be rogues and thieves in the dress of kings, in the dress of president, prime minister, or whatever. And what will they do? On the plea of taxation, they'll rob the citizenry. And eventually it's described that the people will be harassed so much by famine, by bad weather, and by this extreme injudicious taxation by the rascal kings, that the citizens will actually just leave the country and just go away and live in the forest. Better to live in the forest, not like a sage, but like an animal, than to suffer at the hands of these rascal kings. So why is this taxation brought up in the Bhagavatam and mentioned here also? Because it's so contrary to the nature of a king, that the king has a right to tax for the sake of maintaining the country, for the sake of protecting the country, for the sake of supporting brahmanas and Brahminical culture and spiritual activities for the welfare, material and spiritual welfare of the whole country. He has that right. But if it's misused, then that's the greatest crime. Just like a brahmana has a right to accept in charity. But if he misuses that money, then that acceptance of charity on a false plea is the greatest crime. Therefore, in this purport, Prabhupada is criticizing that these so-called brahmanas of today, who think they're brahmanas just because they're sons of brahmanas, but have no Brahminical qualification. So a king who taxes improperly, a brahmana who takes donations improperly, a Vaishya who makes money or collects wealth improperly, a Sudra who serves improperly, because it's in denial of their dharma so strongly. Therefore, this is an important point, why Prabhupada is making a point, and the Bhagavatam is making this point about taxation. And again, you may remember we talked last week, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how a great king has to have this combination of great power, great potency and strength, and Ishwar above, and also has to have at the same time the heart that is sensitive, that is compassionate, that knows Dharma and does everything in terms of Dharma. So this is also the example of Yudhishthira Maharaj in this case, that he's this perfect king for this reason. Also, he has this strength, he has this ability. He wants to do the Ashramedha Yajna to alleviate the sin of killing kinsmen, but he's not willing to harm the population for the sake of doing that. So therefore, his brothers, on the advice of Lord Krishna, they went and collected the leftover gold from the sacrifice long ago of this King Maruta. And even in the story of King Maruta, when he went to the heavenly planets and wanted to perform a sacrifice, and Brihaspati wouldn't do it because he was ordinary mortal. This is Brihaspati behaving, instead of like a proper Brahmana, he's behaving like a smarta Brahmana. This is just like this improper taxation is the great sin of the kings. So this smartaism, this casteism, is a great sin for the Brahmanas. So this is what Brihaspati did. He wouldn't become the priest for Maruta Maharaj. So therefore, Narada Muni said, you get this other person to do it. And he was successful in that way. So anyway, so Yudhishthira Maharaj is feeling like this. I want to reduce the sinful reaction from the killings in the Mahabharata war. So he chooses to do this through performing an Ashramedha Yajna. Why does he choose it to do it in that way? It's the traditional method at the time. Remember, this is in a previous yuga, at the end of Dwapara Yuga. It's accepted at that time. It has Vedic substantiation. At that time, there were still Brahmanas left who were actually capable of performing these yajnas, like Ashramedha Yajna, Rajasuya Yajna. So it was possible, and it was accepted, not only accepted, but it was more or less expected at that time that this is how kings would behave. This is how kings would do their pious activities, how they would do their prayaschita, their atonement for mistakes and for sins. So therefore, the Ashramedha was chosen. And not only that, but in tomorrow's verse, we'll hear that specifically, he's not just doing a ritual Ashramedha, but it specifically said that this was being done for the sake of the pleasure of Lord Hari. So that's the bottom line. Just some ritual ceremony by itself is actually insufficient to eradicate sin. This is described very nicely. If we go to the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a very interesting discussion between Shukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj, where Shukadev actually tests Parikshit Maharaj's knowledge and understanding. So we may remember in the 5th canto, there's big description of the hellish planets. If you perform this sin, you go here and you suffer this intense suffering for an inconceivable long period of time. And if you do this, you go to this planet and suffer for a long time. And if you do that, you go to that planet and suffer for a long time. And a big kind of, horrific, hair-raising description of the sins and the hellish planets and the punishments involved there. So, and that's the end of the 5th canto. So then at the beginning of the 6th canto, Parikshit Maharaj says, you've told me all about this hellish planets. I can't bear to think of so many people suffering so much in this way for their sins. What can be done about that? What's the solution so that people won't have to suffer like that? And he's asking because Parikshit Maharaj is a Vaishnava. A Vaishnava is Paraduka Duki. This is Paraduka Duki literally means para dukkha. The dukkha means suffering. So para dukkha means the suffering of others. So para dukkha duki. The suffering of others causes me suffering. This is Paraduka Duki. This is the mood of the Vaishnava. If the Vaishnava sees or hears about someone else suffering, he feels that is his suffering. It causes him pain. This is from the verse by Raghunath Das Goswami glorifying Srila Sanatana Goswami. It says, Kripambudir ya Paraduka Duki, Sanatanam tam prabhum ashrayami. That Kripambudir, Srila Sanatana Goswami is Kripambudir, an ocean of mercy. He's an ocean of mercy. He's a Vaishnava. So of course he's an ocean of mercy and Paraduka Duki. Therefore he feels the suffering others to be like his own suffering. Sanatanam tam prabhum ashrayami. Therefore I am surrendering at the lotus feet of Srila Sanatana Goswami. So of course this is the mood of a Vaishnava. Just like yesterday we also heard Karanam Kuru Mai Karuna Bharite. That because this is the mood of Krishna and this is the mood of Radharani herself, that she's filled with this mood of compassion, that she's saturated with and overflowing with compassion for the conditioned souls. So naturally, the Vaishnava feels like this. Also, since yesterday was Radhashtami, there's also a nice story told in the Padma Purana. It's a popular story in Braja. When you're doing the Govardhan Parikrama, those who have gone may remember you go around, you go through the town of Govardhan, then you go to the end of the hill, Punchari, you continue around, you go back through Govardhan village, then you're continuing down the other side, Uddhavakund, and then just right before you enter the town of Radhakund, and just before you get to Radhakund itself, there's a little kund. I haven't been there in many years, but nowadays it's mostly just like a wet spot in the ground for most of the year. Maybe it even dries out, I'm not sure. But there's a little kund, a little lake called Shiva Kori. And at that place, the story goes that one time Radhika was with her girlfriends hanging out by Radhakund, and they heard some noise in the distance, like a sound of children yelling and jeering, and also the sound of like an animal howling in distress. So what had happened is that there was one jackal, and some of the local children who could understand this was during Krishna's time, during Radha's time in Vrindavan, but children, sometimes they have a cruel streak. So the children were chasing and harassing this jackal, and they chased it into a hole in the ground, and they were harassing it and disturbing it and scaring it. And even outside the hole that the jackal had taken shelter in, they lit a fire to try to chase the jackal out so they could harass it more. But when Radha and her gopis heard this sound, Radha told her gopis that she said, go see what that doesn't sound auspicious. This jeering of children and howling and pain and distress of an animal. I can't bear, she said, I can't bear that in my town, in Vrindavan, and especially in my own place of Radhakund, that anyone should be suffering. I can't bear it. Go investigate. So some of her gopis went to do it, and they saw what was happening. They chastised the children and chased them away and put out the fire and took out the poor jackal. And they brought that jackal before Radhika, and she blessed that jackal that you'll get a position, you'll be able to become my associate in the future. So that place became a great holy place, little place you could see on your Govardhan Parikrama. And this is Radhika's mood, and this is every Vaishnava's mood, that they cannot tolerate the suffering of others. So Parikshit Maharaj, get back to Parikshit Maharaj. So he couldn't tolerate the suffering of others, not just one jackal, but millions and billions and trillions and gazillions of living entities are every day committing sins, and then dying and going to hell and suffering unimaginable sufferings for a long time. So he begged of Shukadeva Goswami, what's the means by which these persons can be delivered from their suffering? And now Shukadeva Goswami gave an answer, but he was actually testing Parikshit Maharaj. He says, karmana karmanir haro na hyatyantika ishyate. He says, he says, if there's some sin which causes suffering, then you have to do prayaschita, some atonement. So you follow the rules of Manu Samhita, you follow the rules of different Dharma Shastra, and you perform pious works in order to counteract the sins that you've performed. And thus you'll be delivered, people will be delivered from sins. And Parikshit heard that, and he actually, although Shukadeva is his guru, but he said, I reject that. That answer is not at all right and not at all satisfying to me. We've seen so many times people are criminals and they're arrested by the government, they're punished by the government, and they receive some punishment, but still, and even they know the punishment is coming, but they go on being thieves. And people commit sins, and even if you try to correct it, they go on doing something improper. So I think that using good karma to counteract bad karma is not a very good idea. He said, this is like manye kunjara shochavat. He said, I consider this to be just like the bathing of an elephant. The elephant, Prabhupada describes, that the elephant goes in the water and bathes very nicely, cleans itself off, scrubs itself off. We've all seen, maybe at a zoo, how elephants, they'll take in water through their trunk, and then they'll swing the trunk back and spray the water all over their back and all over their body, and they'll clean themselves very nicely. And then what do? They come out of the water, clean as a whistle, and then they fall down and roll in the dirt. So this is using karma to counteract karma, is manye kunjara shochavat. It's just like the bathing of the elephant. You seem so-called clean, but you just roll in the dirt again. So this is not a very good solution. Nahyatika, karmana karma nirharo, nahyatyantika ishyate. So Shukadeva Goswami agrees that Parikshit Maharaj, his disciple, has passed the first test. Yes, using karma to counteract karma is not the final solution, is not the proper solution. One good example of this is, we know the story from later on in the Bhagavatam of Maharaj Nriga. Maharaj Nriga performed so many pious activities. It was practically incalculable. He gave so many cows in charity, and he gave so much gold and wealth and food and villages and servants and sesame seeds and all these things in charity to so many brahmanas, and he was so liberal in his charity. But he performed one sin in it, and not even on purpose, accidentally he performed this sin. And I'm guessing everyone knows the story that he gave cows in charity to one brahmana, and from that group of cows, that one cow wandered out and came back by instinct into the king's cow herd, and then he gave that same cow in charity to another brahmana. So because of that, there was a big argument between the brahmanas. It's my cow, no, it's my cow, no, it's my cow. And because of that one inadvertent offense, when he died, he went to Yamaraj, and Yamaraj didn't say, oh, you've performed so much pious activities, good karma, that eliminates the bad karma. He said, no, you've done so much good karma, and you'll get the good results for that karma, but you've committed this one offense and you still have to suffer the reaction to that offense. So it actually doesn't nullify the sin. It just provides like a counterbalance to it, but it doesn't eliminate it. and therefore he had to suffer for a long time as a lizard in a well, and then Lord Krishna eventually liberated him. But anyway, karma does not eliminate karma. Good karma does not eliminate bad karma. This is not proper prayaschita. This is not proper atonement. So the next solution that Shukadev Goswami suggests, he says, avidvad adhikaritvat prayaschitam vimarshanam. He said, yes, you're right. The solution, the proper atonement is not, the proper solution is not doing good karma. The proper solution is the cultivation of knowledge, jnana. The real problem of sin is ignorance. So the solution is to cultivate jnana. And knowledge is better than karma because it will gradually purify one. And then he quotes an interesting verse, a verse that Prabhupada would quote fairly often. Tapasya brahmacharyena, samena cha damena cha, tyagena satyasochabhyam, yamena niyamena va. That these are the practices of Jnana Marg. Tapasa, doing tapasya, performing austerities, self-denial, fasting, all these different things. Brahmacharyana, maintaining strict vow of celibacy. Samena cha, damena cha, controlling the mind, controlling the senses. Tyagena, giving up all inauspicious things. Satya, being truthful. Shochabhyam, being very clean and pure in everything you do. Yamena niyamena va, following all the rules and regulations. These are good things to do, but these are the foundation of Jnana Yoga, of Jnana Marg, or of Ashtanga Yoga also, the Yama and Niyama and all these different rules, controlling the senses, controlling the mind. And it says about this, the next verse says that, yes, you perform all these things and it will destroy all sins, just like Vena Gulma Ivanala, just like all the plants are destroyed by a fire. A fire burns and it burns all the bamboos and all the creepers of the forest. But the problem is, as explained, is that when the fire comes, it burns all the creepers. And you think, oh, see, Jnana destroyed all the sins. The fire destroyed all the creepers, all done. But very soon after, from the roots and seeds under the ground, those bamboos and those creepers will sprout again. And before you know it, the forest is as thick as ever. So Jnana Yoga will actually destroy sin, but because it doesn't destroy the seeds of sinful desire in the heart, those sins will sprout up again and sprout up again. It's a more thorough solution than simply performing good karma or karma yoga, but it's still not a perfect response. And therefore, Parikshit Maharaj also rejects this answer. And there's many places where this is described also later in the Bhagavatam. The verse, Yenye Ravindaksha Vimuktamanina Tvayasta Bhava Avashuddha Buddhaya Aruya Kritrena Padam Padam Tata Patantido Najati Yushmadangraya. This verse is describing the same principle, that by Jnana Yoga, by meditation, by austerities, you can get apparently a very high situation, vimuktamanina, where you think yourself, at least you consider yourself liberated within your mind. But because it doesn't remove the seed of desire from the heart, patantyido najatayusmadangraya, again you'll fall down. This is the fault of Jnana Yoga. And that verse in particular describes that the real fault there is because of neglect of the supreme, neglect of the worship of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Patantino nadrita yusmarangraya, because you don't have sufficient regard for the lotus feet of Krishna, therefore you'll fall down from that process of Jnana Yoga. So therefore, the real conclusion that Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev come to is Kechit Kevalaya Bhaktya Vasudeva Parayana Agam Janvanti Kartsnyena Niharam Eva Bhaskara. That Kachit Kevalayal Bhaktya, only a person who takes to the pure, unmotivated, uninterrupted devotional service of Krishna. Vasudeva Parayana, he surrendered to Krishna and exclusively surrendered to Krishna. Agam Janvati Kartsnyena, only for this person is sin completely eradicated. And not only completely eradicated, but niharam eva bhaskara, completely eradicated with no chance of it returning. Just like when the sun rises in the morning and completely eradicates the fog. So this is the difference. Devotional service is the only absolutely effective prayaschita, the only perfectly effective atonement for sins, for misunderstanding, for gross sins, and for the sins in the heart, the sinful desires in the heart, and the subtle seeds of sin that leads to sinful desires, that leads to sinful action. This is also described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in Nectar of Devotion, that sin exists at different stages: prarabdha, aparabdha, bija, and kuta. And I always confuse them, prarabdha and aparabdha. One of them is sinful reactions that have already manifested for sins that you have performed. Just like if you spend many years smoking cigarettes, then when you get lung cancer, that's the practical manifestation of the sinful reaction that you're seeing. Or someone may be smoking cigarettes for years, but they haven't yet got cancer. That's when they're performing the sins, but the sinful reaction is not yet manifested. That's prarabdha and aparabdha. And like I said, I can't remember which is which. Then there's a bija, which means the seed of desire in the heart, that in your heart, you're thinking, I'd like to smoke a cigarette. So that's a desire in the heart. And you have that desire, and then you act on it and you smoke a cigarette. And that's the performance of actual sinful activity for which you get a reaction. And then later on, you'll get the reaction for that, the lung cancer. And then there's even more subtle manifestation, kuta, which is a general, less specific desire for sense gratification and sinful activity and bad activity. And that leads to a specific sinful desire. Let me smoke a cigarette, which leads to a specific activity. I'm smoking a cigarette, which leads to a particular sinful reaction of getting lung cancer. And devotional service is the only process that has the power to destroy sin in all four of those stages. So this is the power of it. So then we may ask, so why is Yudhishthira, why does he want to do this Ashwamedha Yajna? He had his reasons. Like I said, according to time and circumstance, he was doing these things. And also because for him, the Ashwamedha Yajna was an act of devotional service. Like I said, tomorrow's verse will explain that it was done for the pleasure of Lord Hari. But for us, as Prabhupada emphatically stated in the purport, none of those sacrifices are meant for today. And even in that time, that was not the key point. The key point was worshiping Krishna, just like when the Pandavas did the Rajasuya Yajna. The Rajasuya sacrifice is important for a king to do to establish his authority. But the real glory of the Rajasuya sacrifice was that they accepted Krishna as the key worshipable person of the sacrifice. And actually that was done against the desires of some people. There were some demons who argued that Krishna should not be the worshipable person, and then therefore Krishna killed, who was it? Not Jarasandha. Who was it at the Rajasuya who complained about
Shishupal.
Shishupal? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Shishupal and Dantavakra, both Krishna had to kill at the Rajasuya sacrifice. So that's the real glory of the Rajasuya sacrifice. that the establishment that Krishna is the greatest person. Krishna is the real object of worship. This is the glory of the Rajasuya. And this is the type of Ashwamedha that Parikshit Maharaj is performing, not merely some ritual, but for the pleasure of Krishna, for the glorification of Krishna. He knows that. That's why if we go to Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also says that you have to do yagya. Yagyartat karmanonyacha, lokayam karma bandhana, tad artam karma konteya, mukta sangha samachara. That sacrifice has to be performed. And what is sacrifice? Yagyartat karmanonyacha, lokoyam karma bandhana, tad artam karma konteya. It has to be done for the benefit of Vishnu. This is actual sacrifice, not just some ritual, some blind ritual like a Smarta Brahmana. Prabhupada told a humorous story. There was a village of Brahmanas, of Smarta Brahmanas, who were simply absorbed in rituals. So every day they would go down to the local river and take their bath. And with them, they would bring their brass tray with the Achman cup and the bowl of flower petals and the bowl of turmeric rice and a bell for ringing and the incense holder, just like we see like an arati tray. And they had all their different paraphernalia because they would go there and do their rituals every morning. But then they found that because there were so many brahmanas and they all had the identical brass trays, when they came from bathing in the river, there would be some confusion about which tray belongs to which brahmana. Is this my tray? Is this your tray? So one brahmana got a brilliant idea. He said, oh, I'll mark my tray. So he took a little bit of clay from the riverbank. He rolled it in a ball and he put it on his tray. So all the other brahmanas saw it. He said, oh, what's this ball of clay? This must be some ritual we don't know about. So they all imitated blindly, thinking this was some ritual. So they all took a ball of clay and rolled it up and put it on their tray. And all the brahmanas came out from the river and they were still confused whose tray is whose, because they were simply blindly following some ritual without any understanding at all. This is the fault of the Smarta Brahmana. So we reject this Smartaism, and Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, this yagyartat karmanonyatra, but he wasn't expecting Arjuna to sit down and do a fire sacrifice and chant swaha and start pouring ghee and grains on a fire. He expected him to fight. He expected him to do his duty, because that doing your duty for Krishna, this is yagya. Working for Krishna is yagya. Devotional service is the real yagya. I remember my very first day moving into the temple, into the Long Island, New York temple. And one very nice devotee, unfortunately since passed away, Rupa Raghunath Das. I'm sorry, Rupa Sanatan Das. He engaged me in some service. The temple had a truck, and they had all these old, beat up, useless, old stoves and broken refrigerators, and we were taking them to the town dump to dump them off. So we got there, and it was springtime when I moved in, but it was a hot day, and we were, struggling and moving these very heavy stoves and off the truck and into the town dump, and big refrigerators, and really hot and sweaty and dirty. And finally we finished, and we were sitting on the back of the truck, and Rupa Sanatan, he goes, boy, that was a jug. And, I was brand new first day in the temple. I said, a jug? The only jug I know is like a milk jug or something. I said, a jug? What do you mean a jug? So then he explained to me, a jugya. Jugya means sacrifice. And he explained to me the whole thing, about fire sacrifice and traditional sacrifice. But for us, jugya means a sacrifice for Krishna, devotional service. So I learned my first ISKCON lingo, and my first bit of philosophy from him in that way. So this is yagya. Performance of yagya is actually devotional service. And Yudhishthira Maharaj did his yagya as devotional service according to his time and circumstance. And we do, in our way, as Prabhupada gave to us, yagya according to time and circumstance. And for us, that means devotional service. And even more specifically, as Prabhupada says in the purport, it means Sankirtan Yagya. This is our real yagya that we do. We have these other things to some degree. Yagya, fire sacrifice. Prabhupada would, when possible, do a fire sacrifice. But he wasn't interested in making it overly elaborate or overly complicated or overly ritualistic. He would keep it simple, bona fide but simple, fire sacrifice. And nowadays devotees do more complex rituals, and that's actually a nice thing, to develop the rituals and do them more. Just like there's also the story in San Francisco, I think it was, when they had the very first Jagannath deities that they were worshiping in the temple. And so the first puja that Prabhupada instituted was that every day at Kirtan or after Kirtan, they would take a candle. They had like those little birthday candles, and the devotees would light a candle and wave it before Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra, just like we do for like in Kartik when we offer the ghee lamps. So they were offering candles to Lord Jagannath and putting it. So after doing that sometime, a devotee says, yeah, we're doing these candles, Prabhupada. I don't know if he was Prabhupada or Swamiji at that time. So Swamiji, is there more that we could do? He said, oh yes, there's more. You can also take some incense, and you also light incense and also wave it before the deities. And then the devotee says, is there more than that? And he says, oh, there's so much. He said, there's a lot more. There's so much more. There's so much more that if I told you everything, you would faint. So there's no end to rituals, and we could do rituals. Rituals are nice. Also, I heard this from Ravindra Swarup Prabhu told me that Prabhupada said that we are not unceremonious. So we don't reject ceremony. We don't reject ritual, but we don't slavishly follow them like the Smarta Brahmanas. They're they're in service of our devotional service. What's that? Smartavya Satadam Vishnor Vismartavya Najatachit Sarva Vidi Nasedasyor Etayor Eva Kinkara. That we have so many rules and regulations, but those rules and regulations are the maid servants of the main rule and regulation to be engaged in devotional service always. So we have fire sacrifices, we have deity worship, we can do this puja and that puja, but it's all in the service of always remembering Krishna, never forgetting Krishna, always serving Krishna, and never not serving Krishna. So this is the understanding of these rituals. And therefore, actually in Kali Yuga, many of these things, not only not recommended, but forbidden. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu quotes, this is maybe Mahabharata, I can't actually remember. Ashramedam Gavalambam Sanyasam Palapatrikam Devarena Sutotpatim Kalo Pancha Vivarjaya. That Ashrameda Yagya canceled in Kali Yuga. Gavalamba, cow sacrifice, canceled. Sannyas even canceled in Kali Yuga. Also, there was that offering flesh in sacrifice to the forefathers was a Vedic tradition, canceled in Kali Yuga, no offering flesh. And the last one was something that may seem odd to us today, because the kingly lineage, we've heard about Parikshit Maharaj, how he's glorified by that kingly lineage. So if the king dies without producing a son, then the brother of the king was allowed to have sex with the widowed queen in order to produce a child. Or very close to that is just like Pandu couldn't produce children, so okay, invite Indra, invite Surya to produce children. That's also, or also there's the case of calling in Vyasadeva to produce children in the wives of Bhishmadev's brothers' widows. All of that forbidden nowadays, because now we have to exclusively concentrate on devotional service, because devotional service is the only effective method. And not only nowadays, but always, all of these rituals and all of these sacrifice, even when they're properly done, and even when they're devotional, there's a tendency to get wrapped up in the ritual, to get wrapped up in the material practice, in the mechanical reproduction of sacrifice. There's a tendency there to have devotional service take a back seat. And Prabhupada would not allow that to happen. He instituted sufficient rituals, but they were always secondary to devotional service. There's a famous purport, also a little later, a couple of chapters later in the 6th canto. Just a second, I have it over here. I have to go get it. In the 6th canto, 3rd chapter, Prabhupada is explaining about these rituals are all finished and rejected in Kali Yuga. So he says, this is from 6.3, maybe text 25, I'm not sure. I'll read a little bit from this purport. Prabhupada writes, since one may easily achieve the highest success by chanting the holy name of the Lord, one may ask why there are so many Vedic ritualistic ceremonies and why people are attracted to them. This verse answered that question. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Vedaischa Sarvar Aham Eva Vedya. The real purpose of studying the Vedas is to approach the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Unfortunately, unintelligent people bewildered by the grandeur of Vedic yajnas want to see gorgeous sacrifices performed. They want Vedic mantras chanted and huge amounts of money spent for such ceremonies. Sometimes we have to observe the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies to please such unintelligent men. Recently, when we established a large Krishna Balaram temple in Vrindavan, we were obliged to have Vedic ceremonies enacted by Brahmanas because the inhabitants of Vrindavan, especially the Smarta Brahmanas, would not accept Europeans and Americans as bona fide Brahmanas. Thus, we had to engage Brahmanas to perform costly yajnas. In spite of these yajnas, the members of our society performed Sankirtan loudly with mridangas, and I considered the Sankirtan more important than the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies. Both the ceremonies and the Sankirtan were going on simultaneously. The ceremonies were meant for persons interested in Vedic rituals for elevation to heavenly planets. Janma, what's that? Jadakrita Matir Madhu Pun Pitayam. Whereas the Sankirtan was meant for pure devotees interested in pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We would simply have performed Sankirtan, but then the inhabitants of Vrindavan would not have taken the installation ceremony seriously. So Prabhupada would sometimes bow to this, as he explained here. The real method is the Sankirtan, but we want people to accept the beautiful Krishna Balaram Mandir and come to it and become purified. But the real essence is the chanting of the holy name. The real essence is devotional service, not the rituals. We have the rituals, and the rituals are beautiful. Just like yesterday, it was so sweet, so nice. It's a ritual. Like they were coming up, taking and offering a flower to Radha. It's a ritual, but it's devotional service. Or even the balloons. It was so sweet seeing the balloons piling up on the ceiling above the deities. It's beautiful because it's an expression of devotion. So this is the perfection of ritual. Don't overdo it. Don't make it overblown. Don't make it ritual for ritual's sake. But some ritual is nice. It instills some faith and potency and gravity in the situation. Just like the fire sacrifice at initiation. Sometimes Prabhupada would initiate by mail or initiate without a fire sacrifice by just saying. But the fire sacrifice itself gives gravity to the act of devotional service of surrendering to the Guru. And sometimes he would even say about a devotee going away, he said, you've promised before the sacrificial fire So you can't break that vow. Or how could you break that vow when you promised before the guru, before the Vaishnavas, before the sacrificial fire? So we have these rituals, and they're sweet, and they're beautiful, and they're subservient to the principle of devotional service. And again, going back to Yudhishthira, he did these things because it was expected, but his heart was always, the essence of his heart is devotional service to Krishna. Therefore, even this Ashwamedha sacrifice, to be purified, he knows it's an offering to Lord Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Any question or comment or discussion?
Hey Krishna Prabhu, I was wondering if you could share the link of that letter that you just read.
You mean the about the Krishna Balaram Mandir?
Right. The
Yeah,
ritual.
it's a Bhagavatam purport from the 6th canto, 3rd chapter, and my memory is failing me. I can't remember the verse number, but it's 20 something, if I remember correctly. So 6.3.20.
Okay, I'll
find it without too much difficulty that way.
I'll check that right now. Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't be more specific.
No, it was very beautiful and very something that we can explain to a lot of people who ask, well, why didn't we break a coconut and why didn't we do,
Right.
Yeah, so it is very.
Yeah, it's hard because it's such a cultural thing, an expected thing, and we can. Sometimes you break a coconut. What's the harm, right?
Right.
As long as as long as the primary thing it's accompanied by kirtan distribution. We may even, like Prabhupada, bowed a little bit to the social pressure or the cultural pressure. He bowed a little bit to it for the sake of establishing the prestige of the movement. So sometimes we could do that a little bit judiciously, not too much.
Yes.
But sometimes we could also bow to that. And like Prabhupada did, he did it, but he also offers such an explanation of what's actually going on. So we can also do like that.
That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you, Guru.
Hare Krishna. Yes, Mother Mitravinda, please.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much. This has been a really wonderfully reflective, and many of these things I've heard before. You went into great detail this morning. Some of the things I do remember from living at Gita Nagri when Brahmahorta and others were studying to be pujaris and all these wonderful things. I have a question for you. So my question relates to this information you gave today of devotional service. Many people knew, and some who just haven't taken the time to understand or go deeper into Shastra, think of devotional service as a certain way. People are given services or they're told what service is, but it's very vast. But ultimately, your explanation of devotional service is unmotivated and for Krishna, not thinking, well, if I do this, as is done when circumambulating Tulsi, I get the benefit, my sins are cleansed, so forth and so on. But the aspect of unmotivated devotional service is quite difficult. If you're in a human body, there's always some thought of, what a person can get. And so the aspects of what devotional service is, it's so many things. It's smelling the flower. It's looking at Krishna. It's chanting. It's not just washing pots or doing some instruction that someone gives. It seems to be that service, which is not necessarily instructed, tends to be more on the level of these aspects of unmotivated. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. That the things we do without having to be told, as being more spontaneous and more more in the nature of unmotivated, uninterrupted, spontaneous devotional service. That's a very nice idea. And I like that. And I think that's true to a large extent. But it's also true that, you know, something we maybe weren't planning to do or weren't thinking of doing, and someone says, you know, the floor needs to be mopped. And you may not be spontaneously interested in doing it, but okay, you mop the floor. And you could also see that, even if it's not spontaneous in the sense that you didn't initiate it, but spontaneous devotional service is also, you know, if someone says doing the needful, there's that expression, doing the needful, that's also, but I also very much like that idea that the things we do without being asked, that you're thinking, you know, I want to sit down, and I'm of my own volition sitting down and making time to read Prabhupada's books, or of my own volition, I'm voluntarily doing this service or doing this preaching like that. That's beautiful. And that spontaneity can really be a powerful thing, and should be encouraged and should be built upon. Not like someone's, you know, you're spontaneously attracted, you're reading a book, and you don't want someone to say, oh, why are you reading a book? Go mop the floor.
Yes.
The floor has to be mopped. But you shouldn't crush the spontaneous enthusiasm that another person has. You say, you know, this, I'm creating an idealized situation that you may go, oh, it's so nice you're spontaneously involved in reading. Let's read Bhagavatam together for half an hour, and then after we do that, let's tackle this dirty floor afterwards together also.
Yes.
So there's all sorts of managerial tricks, and just, you know, sensitive and intelligent and well-considered personal dealings, how to encourage enthusiasm and also get the, you know, doing the needful. So there's a balance, because there is doing the needful. Sometimes Prabhupada would, you know, engage devotees in things that, you know, just simply because they had to do. What was it? I think it was Tamal Krishna. Prabhupada had made him the GBC, like all India GBC. And he was just so fried from doing it. And he asked to be removed from it. And Prabhupada, I can't remember the exact history or the exact words. And Prabhupada said, yes, you can ask to be removed and you can go away. But I can't give up my responsibilities. No one's going to take over my duties if I give them up. So even Prabhupada sort of had to do the needful many times to get things done. So there's a balance of that. But I really like that idea very much of cultivating in devotional service things that you really like to do and are spontaneously want to do. That's a beautiful thing to develop. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Anything else? Question or discussion? Oh, okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Oh, Jonah Prabhu. Yes.
We have read from Dhamacharya Prabhu. That's good.
I just wanted to say there are so many takeaways that I got from today. I really appreciate this class. It was just very, very helpful in understanding. I like the point about the karma, and that bad karma doesn't, or good karma doesn't offset bad karma. Very important. I mean, I haven't heard it explained that way exactly, but it really made a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, thanks.
And I'm just thinking on this presentation, the class that you gave today, I would like to arrange for you to give it at a larger audience somehow. Because I think, again, the takeaways and the points and the subtleties between good karma, bad karma, ritual, devotion, how we can, even the point you made about we're not unceremonious, that Ravindra Prabhu said. So it's like doing the ceremonies, but not doing them for karma kanda, but doing them as acts of devotion to the Lord. It was packaged so very well. I appreciate it very much.
You're very kind. Thank you. Okay, any announcements for tonight?
Yeah, we had the Sunday feast tonight, beginning at 4:30.
The feasting never ends.
Never ends. Yeah, we know we had a wonderful Radhastami celebration yesterday. We're hoping to see everybody tonight as well. Sometimes if there's an event on a Saturday, Sunday's a little bit not as well attended, but we're hoping to see as many people there tonight. We know it's a Labor Day weekend as well. Some people may be traveling, but whether a lot of people show up or little people show up, you'll get the experience of Bhagavad Gita, devotee association, kirtan, wonderful prasadam. So hope to see you tonight. We're starting the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita.
Oh yeah, right. Awesome.
Yeah.
That'll be great also.
Yeah. We'll learn about the mind, how to control the mind, the nature of the mind.
Yeah. I don't know if other temples do that they do like series of classes at the Sunday feast throughout a chapter or along a theme. And I don't know how many or if any other temples do that, but I really like how we do that in Philly. We had Ishopanishad and 6th canto, and we did 6th chapter. And previously we did 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. I really like that.
Yes, that was Vishnu Prabhu's his doing, his idea.
Yeah.
To make it, somewhat systematic.
Yeah, I like that idea very much.
Great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. Hare Krishna. All
Yeah,
glories
Hare
to
Krishna,
Prabhupada.
Prabhu. I just
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.